Welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host, Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's podcast. And we're focusing today on coaching grief. And this is because we were asked to cover this by Anthula, who mentioned this as a topic in our Coaching Crowd group. The reason that we are also interested in coaching with grief is because we believe that all coaching involves change. And by the nature of change, it involves beginnings and endings. It involves letting go and welcoming in.
Yeah, and I guess we start by redefining grief, don't we? I think when you think of grief in a traditional sense, you're led to sadness and grieving the loss of somebody who is potentially close to you. When in reality, grief is about so many different experiences. It can be about having been made redundant from a role and needing to grieve through that journey. It could be about endings of other relationships or other things in your life. So when we talk about grief, it isn't always about sadness. It can also be about inner conflict. It can be about decision making. It can be about stuckness, in coaching, that some people are stuck because they haven't been able to end and close and grieve for the thing that is past. So as we talk about this topic, just bear that in mind as you start to think about grief and open up your definition of what grief is within a coaching space.
I think it's also important for us to mention that our coaching clients can experience grief when it comes to the ending of the coaching relationship. And so as coaches, we can start the relationship with the end in mind, from the beginning, acknowledging that the coaching relationship will come to an end. How will we do this together in a way that honors the time and the connection that we have together so that we can role model healthy beginnings, endings, and evolving relationships? Because we also find this in our coaching training programs. We facilitate those sessions over an 8-month period on a weekly basis. And when we get to the last sessions, we always tell people in advance, right, 4 sessions to go, 3 sessions to go, to remind people and help to orientate them to the next phase. And in that last session, you can feel and sense and hear the loss that people are experiencing. And that's a normal and natural, reaction for people to have a whole range of emotions. And grief isn't one emotion, I don't think. It's often a bundle of emotions that feel confusing because, we can be satisfied and feel proud of, where we're at, whilst also feeling fearful about the future. Will it live up to the experience that we have had? Will we be able to have another feeling or experience like that in our future?
Yeah, I would say also building on that sometimes clients don't know that they're grieving. And in coaching, it can really help people to recognize what it is they are experiencing and what it is they are struggling with, because some grief is obvious. If you lose somebody close to you, you're going to grieve. That's accepted grief, isn't it? It's expected and accepted. But if you are coming out of a role and perhaps you chose to leave that role behind because it was no longer a fit for you, and perhaps perhaps it was a toxic environment, or you didn't have a great relationship with your manager. So for whatever reason, you have chosen to move on. Because you've made the choice, I think it is expected that you're okay with that and that you don't grieve for it because you chose it. And that's not the case, is it? As we know by working with clients, that just because you choose something, it doesn't mean that you don't have the right to grieve for that something. And giving clients permission, I think, to feel all the things that they might need to feel in relation to those choices and the experiences that they have can be really liberating and can help them to fully embrace the choice that they have made with a new range of emotions, with positivity and excitement and joy for what is next. But taking time to accept those choices and experience and process all the emotions associated with that, it's probably not something you'll easily do elsewhere, because people, I guess, they think that you're just going to be okay with it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And sometimes when we begin working with a coachee as we progress through the sessions, the client might have a realization through the conversations that actually they've had a number of different losses or experienced a number of different losses that they never really acknowledged. And that can be surprising for them. It can sometimes feel like a relief for them that they now almost have a reason for why they have felt this whole range of emotions. So, as you say, people can come to coaching consciously with something related to grief. There may also be things that pop up from an unconscious level, which is the same for all things in coaching. And when you're working with a client around change, and maybe your client's got really enthusiastic about a change that they want to make, you can also help them by asking questions like, what needs to be honored here? Or maybe they're coming back and they're kind of sharing with you a success that they've had, something they've done, it's had a great impact. What needs to be honored here? What needs to be grieved for? And sometimes that might be the old me that would have never spoken up for myself, as well as it might be, it could be something totally different. It could be like sometimes, loss can be around loss of health security. There's been a lot of that, obviously, experienced by people. When we move house, we experience a loss. If you have baby number 2, you're experiencing the loss of the 3 of you that there were before the extra person joined you. You might also ask, what do you need to accept, or what do you want to accept here about yourself, about the situation, and so on? What do you need to forgive? So when we work with clients, often they may end up leaving their current roles. They might want career progression. They secure a new role through the course of the coaching. And how do we help them to exit in a healthy way so that they're equipping themselves to be able to join their new organization or step into the new team and the role that they've got, if they're staying in their organization, even in a way that sets them and the team, those around them, up for success moving forwards?
And of course, you might have clients that come to coaching that aren't grieving, but they might be experiencing some stagnation or feeling stuck, and they're coming to coaching because they want to not experience that. What they want is momentum and engagement and goals and passion. And they may be in loss aversion, which is a real thing, isn't it? Like they're stuck because they're afraid of what they might lose if they make change. And so as coaches, helping clients to recognize, like, what is it that you might be afraid of losing? And of course, are we equipped to deal with the emotions and sensations of loss? It may be that their client has never had to process loss before, and so ironically feels a bit lost around how to process the emotions that might be compatible with making change. Or it might be the opposite, that they have experienced loss, and loss has been deeply painful for them as they've been growing up or in their formative years. And so any form of change or loss takes them back to a time which was really painful. And we know that clients can sort of interconnect experiences. And so some of the work you might do as coaches might be about looking at the past in so much as it is relevant to being able to move forward with those goals, and just disconnecting experiences from each other. That, this decision that you are making about your career or about your life is very different from the things that you were out of control of as you were growing up. And the emotions may feel the same, but helping them to kind of pick it apart and see it in different ways and reframe and gain new perspective can be really liberating and empowering for people.
Well, we also know that there are some common things that people do when they experience loss. One of which, like for me, is if I experience a significant losses, I will tend to go quite in on myself, want to be with myself and withdraw. Not that I necessarily always want to do that, but that feels like a safe place. And coaching might also represent a safe place for somebody that wants to talk about something that they're experiencing that could feel risky elsewhere. Lots of people want to protect people around them as well, especially if they've got a part of their identity is that I'm the one that is there to support others, and it doesn't fit with their identity to want support for themselves. It might be that a client has a realization in coaching that they have actually experienced a number of losses in their life, and they've just kind of moved forward, do, because they find it uncomfortable to sit and really make contact with that experience. But they realize in coaching, the key to the next step that they want to make in their life is to reconcile and process those things and choose a different way forwards. We were talking earlier, weren't we, about perhaps some people are thinking about, well, what's the overlap here between counselling and coaching? Or what about grief support? Is that different to coaching, and how would you know?
Yeah, and it's hard, isn't it? Because every case is different. And I think where you might be on your journey of grief is so variable. And as we know, grief isn't linear, is it? It's not just necessarily just after the event that grief shows up. Grief can show up in lots of different places in a person's life. And I think this is where, as coaches, we have to co-create decisions with our clients around what is and what isn't coaching appropriate based on our level of competence as a practitioner. Now, if somebody is, still in the thick of their grief, and I think you mentioned before we came on, Jo, didn't we, around they're not ready to move on, then arguably it's probably not coaching appropriate, because coaching is about growth. It's about action. It's about moving forward. It's about being willing to let in acceptance and strive for change. And so if your grief is in a place of actually, I'm not ready to let go yet, then it's probably a clear boundary around, in that case, it's not coaching that client needs. It might be timing. It might be something else. It's not to say that they'll never be ready for that coaching, but timing is of the essence. And if it's not that, and the client is unsure, then you'd need to co-create and talk a little bit around, so here's what coaching can do, here's what I can work with, here's what I can't work with, and put it into the client's liberation to decide, yes, that sounds exactly what I need, or actually, no, I don't think I'm ready for that. And trust in the resourcefulness of that client to make the best decision for them.
And remember that grief is all about relationships. Like everything else is in coaching, isn't it? It's about our relationship with people. It's about our relationship with our identity. For some people, it's about their relationship with time, so loss can be anchored into different time points and, anniversaries of things, or it can be about their relationship with their identity, who they thought they were going to be. And actually life has presented different options, and they've chosen different pathways or made decisions at points in time, and when they look back, they're sort of grieving, or in the here and now, they're grieving for that other life that they thought that they were going to have that didn't actually take place. It could be, for example, that a group of people set up an organization, the organization becomes really successful, and their relationships change, and one person decides to leave when the other two aren't ready. And the client is working with you in coaching around how they navigate the relationships with the other board members, or in this particular case, or the other founders, because as the needs of the organization evolve, as it grows, different things are required, and that doesn't always suit them. And so then when somebody leaves, they are grieving the loss of that person and that future of the business that they talked about in the, those exciting phases of, hey, we could do that. It's probably starting the conversation in the pub or a student bedroom, or in some other format. So I think just recognizing or looking out for loss. Sometimes as a coach, we might say to a coachee, it sounds like you've experienced a number of losses. And the client will say, never really thought about it like that. And then we might say, what does that mean for you? Or tell me more. And they say, well, I always just thought, well, there are things that just happened to me and that was that. But now I'm starting to think about it from what you've just said. I don't think I've ever really processed that. What impact has that been having on you? Well, I think actually it's kept me playing small, playing safe, and what I want to achieve next is going to require me to take some risks. And so the conversation might evolve. So you don't have to go deep with these things, do you? Sometimes it's just that shining a light on things, offering a new perspective.
Yeah, we find with clients, don't we, that often clients will come and there'll be a story, that they come with that they are struggling to move past. And it might be the breakdown of a relationship that led to the end of a job, or a business relationship, or a conflict perhaps that they have had, that as they move forward, it's almost like, I don't know, a boomerang, like keeps bringing them back to this very story. And, from a practical perspective, like how do you help people with grief, with endings, with loss, with acceptance? And I think on that, it's often about, let's look at the learnings, let's go back. If you're boomeranging back to this event, let's just look at this event. What is there to learn from this event, which is going to help you to tap into new resources, to recognize the skills that you have been able to bring forward from that particular event? What are the parts of it that you need to let go of? What are the emotions that are almost stuck on this event that you need to talk through and process and let go? And so while some of that might sound therapeutical, if it's safe for the client to do that in coaching, remember, it's in service of them being able to move forward, because they keep kind of bouncing back to it, and it's kind of holding them stuck in that moment. And what we want for our clients is to cut those ties, to help them to move forward, liberated from that event with new perspective, new learnings, new resources, and an invigoration of what they want instead, as opposed to being stuck in those moments.
And those learnings that we encourage them to focus on are positive, and they are future focused, and they are about themselves. And I think that's another critical part of that, being able to move forward with it. So it's not something to shy away from in coaching. It's often something that as coaches we can add real value to in the conversations by exploring, because grief is a universal human experience, and it is often something that is not talked about and is kept as a secret. And that is the thing that can actually be most harmful of all. So for us to normalize beginnings and endings, and to help our clients explore what have they been brought up to believe about loss and grief, and how is that impacting on how they're experiencing their lives, how that the decisions that they make in life. I think that's really important for us to be able to do.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about grief as one flavor. There's also this concept of endings. It doesn't have to be big things. If I was just thinking there, as you were talking, Jo, about the Gestalt cycle of awareness, which if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, go and find us on YouTube, which is In Good Company with Jo Wheatley and Zoe Hawkins. So we've got a video on there about the Gestalt cycle of awareness. Now, if you don't close your Gestalt, so that, think of it as an energy cycle. So you start something, and it might be as simple as, like, let's think about our learners right now writing their first assignments. Okay, so they're thinking about writing their first assignments. They're kind of aware that they need to, and it's in their minds. And they might then start move to a little bit more mental planning. Then they eventually get into, right, picking up the pen and picking up the books. I'm going to do it. They sit down, they write it. They maybe get some feedback on it. And eventually they'll go through to handing in the assignment, and ideally celebrating the assignment, getting the marking criteria, and then withdrawing from the whole process. So being able to think, right, that is complete for me. I'm proud of myself. I've celebrated it. I've done 1/3 of my qualification. I feel happy, and leaving it alone. So often in life, we don't close our gestalts. We leave things open, either through not celebrating, or we get stuck somewhere along that cycle. And so when we're thinking about grief around endings, actually, we need to look at our relationship with closure as well. And how do we close things off? And perhaps we're feeling burnt out, or, feeling like we've got too many things on our minds. You can check in with yourself, like, am I any good at closing things off? Or do I like to keep things open because I have maybe a relationship with closure that needs a little bit of attention? And this also comes up, doesn't it, around, and I think we started here, ending client relationships. Like, coaches can be really long leavers. So like, check in with me in a few months' time. Maybe we'll meet for coffee sometime. Like, you don't need any of that at the end of a client relationship, because you want clean closure, and you want to be able to end client relationships where a place where you and the client know that that chapter has come to a close. Doesn't mean you won't work with them again, but it's how do you end your client relationships? And I think as coaches, we often get to look at our relationship with endings and closure, and as this episode says, grief, as we learn about ourselves as coaches as well.
A great question to close a coaching conversation on, I think, is, in fact, this was shared with me by my coaching supervisor, was how would you like to complete today? So it's acknowledging the fact that we are completing, at the end of our time. And I think part of the way to be able to have a healthy relationship with endings and with grief is where people get stuck and feel pain in relation to grief is often where things haven't been said. So coaching can be a place where the individual can say the things to you as the coach that they would have liked to have said to whoever it is that is part of this kind of situation, maybe that they have got stuck with the grief. So I guess on that note, how would you like to complete today's podcast, Zoe?
Well, I would like to complete by actually celebrating coaches in doing this important work that's often overlooked, I think, in the coaching space, and encouraging coaches to be courageous in, starting to recognize patterns of loss and grief beyond the mainstream topics, I think. And share with us, come into the coaching crowd and share with us your learnings, because I don't think it's a topic that all coaches necessarily feel confident or capable of navigating. So that's how I would like to complete. How about you?
I'd like to thank you for being my fellow podcast host. Thanks. And again, to thank those people who are giving us suggestions for topics that you'd like us to cover in these podcasts. And I hope that it's provided you with some food for thought today. If you want to continue the conversation with us, as Zoe said, come and join us in the coaching crowd. You can buy our book, Deciding to Coach, or you can come and join one of our coaching programs. And all the details are available on www.igcompany.co.uk.